What an incredible last 3 days here at the Sing Conference in Nashville, Tennessee. We've been so encouraged, as you see this set here, to have interviews with key speakers and hear really just wonderful testimonies. Things that I know will encourage you in learning how to share your faith with a crazy culture, how to just grow deeper in your walk with Jesus, and then to hear what God is doing around the world. Now, I pray you'll stay tuned and that you'll watch this next video, and I know that it'll be an encouragement to you. Well, listen, we're thrilled today to have Brian O'Day from the Petoran Project, and kind of an unusual name as the head of an organization with a title like that. So Brian, explain to me the term and why this is the name of your organization.
Yeah, so in Philippians chapter 1, the Apostle Paul is sitting imprisoned. He's very clear about that. And he's writing to the Philippian church, and he says, I want you to know that the gospel is continuing to spread as I'm sharing the gospel with the whole Imperial Guard or Praetorian Guard. And so Paul's sitting still, and he's sharing the gospel and his afflictions and his present circumstances with the Praetorian Guard, this elite portion of the Roman army, and the gospel spreading because the Roman army, you know, these guys, they get orders, they move around, they get out of the military and they retire and they get a plot of land somewhere. And so the gospel's spreading on the backs of these military. And so the Petoran Project is a family of churches in military communities. And so we sit still in our churches. We have real churches, real bodies of Jesus Christ, and we're actively engaging the military community. And as we actively engage the military community with the gospel spreads on their backs as they move around. So they get orders, they get out of the military and they go move somewhere else. And so the gospel's spreading on their backs as we're faithful to share the gospel with them.
You said something about Cornelius, and
yeah.
You know, so explain that again.
So the book of Acts, right, we start with this sect of Jews. So the way is this sect of Jews. And then we're told in Acts chapter 1 that we're going to be, the disciples are going to be Christ's witnesses in Jerusalem, in Judea, in Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. And so we're like waiting for the Gentiles to receive the gospel. And the first Gentile to receive the gospel is Cornelius and his household. And so once that happened, Cornelius is a centurion. So he's a leader in the military. And so once he's reached with the gospel, and his household, which is not just his family, that's also some of his servants in the military with him. And so the gospel's off and running. Back to the Philippians, the Philippian jailer who's converted, he is most likely a veteran from the military, from the Roman army. And you just see it throughout. Centurions, soldiers just kind of pop up. And if you're not looking for it, you might just kind of skim over it. But when you're in a military community interacting with service members all day long, you're like, okay, that's what God might be doing here.
You know what? I think the church at large needs to be more aware and educated upon that, because what an unbelievable mission field.
Absolutely.
Do you find that in their situations that maybe they're a little bit more sensitive sometimes to the gospel because they're transient, they may be apart from their spouse, it's a difficult time, and that maybe they're even a little bit more tender because they're having to face some things on a daily basis. Would you think that?
Absolutely, absolutely. One thing we know about military service is it is difficult. It is a challenge in every way, shape, and form. It's physically difficult, it's mentally difficult, it's morally difficult. We have, especially once we go into a combat zone or once we're dealing with those life and death situations, we are wrestling with moral decisions. What's right, what's wrong when it comes to actual life and death. So it's morally difficult. It's relationally difficult because you get plucked up from everybody you know and love and you join the military. And then you get to know people and then you move. And then you get to know people and then you move. Also, like you said, separation between spouses from parents and kids when deployments happen. And so the military service is suffering. And suffering so often is God's megaphone to help us to hear what he has for us, both for the Christian who needs to grow in Christ, but also for the non-Christian to be like, yeah, I don't have this figured out. I need something that's going to help me through this season.
Now, you've been in the military, right?
I was in the Marine Corps, served 10 years active duty, another 10 years in the reserves.
So it gives you obviously some credibility in the community where you're pastoring and ministering to.
To an extent, yeah, absolutely.
I mean, you've been there, done that, and got the T-shirt, and that you know what they're going through. You can empathize with what they're. That's great. Now, you kind of wear a lot of different hats.
I do.
So, okay, so tell me what you do. I know you're the director, executive director of the Petoran Project, but what are other things that?
So I'm also one of the pastors. So we're 14 churches in military communities, and so I was in the Marine Corps, and I felt like God was calling me out of the Marine Corps to start a church. And so I left the Marine Corps, left active duty, and started a church right outside the base of Marine Corps Base Camp Lejeune. And we were starting the Petoran Project around that same time. And eventually we needed somebody to kind of oversee the strategic vision and just how we operate together.
Sure.
And so they asked me to be executive director for that. And so I still care a lot about military veterans. I still disciple lots of active duty guys because they're in our churches. I'm one of the pastors of Pillar Church of Jacksonville, North Carolina, and then serve as executive director of Petoran Project.
Wow, that's amazing. Do you think it's important for many of the military people that you meet that may not have a church background to be able to kind of, we do a little booklet called The Story. How important do you think it is to be able to kind of cover the storyline with some of these people that may not can connect the dots? You know, because a lot of people, we used to start with Jesus all the time in the presentation, and that's fine with people who have had some background, but a lot of people don't. Do you think it's important to be able to cover that storyline?
Yeah, it's important because I can't assume, so the military, this maybe goes without saying, but the military, 65% of the active duty military is under the age of 30. 65% is under the age of 30. I think like 85% is under the age of 40. So it's a young person game, the military is. And so when you're under 30 years old, 18 to 30 years old, we can't assume that they had a church background, and most of them don't. And so I ask guys all the time, and I use the storying idea of creation, fall, rescue, redemption. And so when we do that, like, hey, do you know what the Bible's about? Do you know what we crazy Christians believe? And sometimes they'll say something. I was talking to a guy a few weeks ago, and a few months ago now, and it was Easter. It was like Easter weekend. And I was like, I asked him that question. He's like, not really. I was like, well, like this Sunday's Easter. Any idea what we're celebrating on Easter? He's like, no clue.
Wow.
He's like a 22, 23-year-old guy. Nice guy, like great Marine. Honestly, I had worked with him as a reservist, and he was an active duty guy. But no clue what Easter was. But what a great opportunity for the gospel. And so I went through the whole story and then just kind of honed in on what exactly is happening in Easter.
And that's probably going to become more and more common as we're kind of in a post-Christian culture.
Yeah.
And so it's really important.
Yeah.
One other question here. We kind of sometimes deal with kind of an angry culture now with the secular culture, but sometimes even within the Christian culture. Any advice that you could speak to the church at large and say, listen, if we're going to reach this generation, okay, I'm dealing with the military here. Let me tell you what's out there. Boy, we better be real salt and light. What advice would you give us?
Yeah, I got two things. One, incarnational mission is really important. And so we like to equip our members. On our best day, we're equipping our members to be incarnational, to share the gospel with the people to their right and left, and they are suffering with them. It's not like, you know, now I'm out of the military, so I'm speaking to them, and they're like, yeah, dude, you don't know how hard my life is. But our members who are on active duty, they are incarnational, they're with them, they're suffering with them. So it's whatever even animosity there is, or I don't disagree with you, they have some of that connection from that shared suffering.
Sure.
The other thing I would say to those who are not in the military is a lot of times that anger that I think you're talking about has a lot of militant language. We use things like, we're in a fight, we've got to stand up, we've got to do those things. And it's not a surprise that a lot of veterans they hear that language and it strikes a chord with them, and they're able to be militarized in the most extreme versions of those things.
Wow.
And I think we've got to be careful, because a lot of Christians are they're just in the social media world and they're jumping into that rhetoric, or they're just sharing that rhetoric. And it's really unhelpful, because a lot of veterans are really prone to finding their next calls. And when you use that militant language, they're prone towards that violence. They've been trained towards that violence. And we've actually seen a little bit of that. We don't need to get into some of the news stories, but the number of veterans that have been recruited into some of these extreme organizations is pretty profound. So just stay away from the militant language. Are we in a fight? Yes, but we've got to remember what the Apostle Paul says in Ephesians 6. We wrestle not against flesh and blood.
Yeah, words are so important. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Well, listen, last question. I want other people to know about the Petoran Project.
Yeah.
What we could pray for you about, because I want the audience to know what you're doing, how they can pray for you, and get behind what you're doing.
Yeah, this is probably a new audience for us. So a lot of people don't even know anything about the Petoran Project. So I would encourage you to go to PretoranProject.org. If you want to evangelize a nation, the military is actually a great place to start. Sure. I believe our nation needs to be re-evangelized. And so the military is a great place to start and engage with, because the gospel can move on the backs of these people who move. The other thing is, our military engages with the nations all day, every day. I served for 10 years on active duty. I traveled to about 15 different nations. I interacted with the militaries of about 15 other nations that I didn't go to them. They came to us, or we met somewhere else. And so we interact with the nations. We're touching the nations all day, every day. We have 14 churches. Our members are all over the place all the time. An active duty member is a member of our church for 2 to 3 years, but the active duty service member a lot of times is only present about half the Sundays or so, because they're traveling all over the place, doing all over the things. And if they have the gospel, they're carrying the gospel with them wherever they go. And so that's what we do. We're making disciples of these folks, and we're advancing the gospel.
You know, and I think sometimes maybe the church doesn't maybe see the impact of how international your ministry is. I mean, as far as global, the gospel goes forward. Because we always think, well, it's military bases here, but the connections they have by going to other countries is just huge.
Yeah, like this year in my church, because I can't keep track of all 14 churches and what's true, but just in my church, we've had guys in the Philippines, we've had guys in Norway, we've had guys in that were on ship, and they hit like 5 to 8 different countries depending on what ship they were on and what they were doing. We had a guy in, where'd he go? I think he went to Saudi. This is just my church of less than 200 people on a Sunday, and we've got people touching those nations, and that's just this year already to this point.
Well, hey, listen, Brian, I just want to say, first of all, my eyes have been really enlightened about what's going on in the military and the opportunities, and just thank you for your faithfulness of being a steward of the gifts that God's given you, so you can train and equip people. And you do have a lot on your plate, and I'm just glad that I've got to know you, and we'll be praying for you. And if there's anything we can do, you let us know. But man, God bless you.
Thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing the story.
Okay, great. Thanks,
Jared.